Have you ever driven over the Burlington Skyway Bridge since its construction in 1958? Now think hard for a second. Do you know who that bridge is named after? If you drive that stretch of the Queen Elizabeth Way, you've probably seen the sign dozens of times, but may not remember. Well, it's named after a former provincial cabinet minister named James Noble Allan, who started as a modest farm boy in Haldimand County, had a shot at being Premier of Ontario, but came up just short. That bridge was opened on the 30th of October, 1958, 59 years ago today. And his story is told in a new book called James Noble Allan, The Man, the Mason, the MPP. And its author, Alison F. Gowling, joins us now for more. Nice to have you here.
Thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let us tell the story of this man who ended up spending almost a quarter century at Queen's Park. He goes off to university, the Ontario Agricultural College in Guelph, at age 14. Smart guy, eh?
Very much so, and you consider that he was the only son of his father's second marriage. His James Sr., they weren't James Sr., but James's father, his first wife had died in about, I think it was 1885, followed by the infant daughter. 6 months later, he remarried. I'm not sure when. Church records were very spotty that I went through. Married around 1893, 1892. Jim was born in 1894. And as you say, he never did his matriculation. Now, the word matriculation you don't hear very often, but he never did his high school, age 14. And he graduated in that, as I said in the book, in that heady spring of 1914 before the Great War.
There was something I learned about one of his classmates at the University of, as it is now known, the University of Guelph. There was a famous guy in his class.
Yes, Harry, Bob Nixon's father, Harry. Harry was about, I think, 2.5 years older. But they studied the same. Harry also studied at the University of Toronto, but he also took agriculture at the OAC in Guelph, as you say, the precursor to today's University of Guelph.
And Harry went on to become Premier of Ontario in 1943.
For 3 months.
That's right. In his early 20s, James Noble Allan joins the Masons. Now, there will be a lot of people watching this who have no idea who the Masons are, because they're not today what they once were back in the day.
Very true.
So tell us about that.
Well, again, a lot of people confuse the Masonic fraternity with a service club. We are not a service club. Like myself, I'm a 32nd degree Mason. My children have followed me. They're the 7th generation in our family. And we're a fraternity. We're based in brotherly love, relief, and truth. Basically, we help one another. We help others. Just to tell you a quick story about, as you say, people don't know about them. A lot of people are misinformed about the Masons. My youngest boy ran into someone, oh, the Masons are this, the Masons are that, just totally talked them down, you know, trash talking. And when he paused for breath, my youngest son says, well, what do you think about the Shriners? Oh, well, the Shriners are great, so on and so forth. Well, my son asked, he says, what's the one qualification to be a Shriner? I don't know, 3rd degree Mason. And the fellow's jaw hit the floor.
But back then, a lot of people were Masons, right? It was a very widespread thing.
Well, Bill Davis told me that when he was in caucus with Frost, in Frost's cabinet, only 3 members of his cabinet weren't Masons, but they were Orangemen, which in sometimes could be mixed up with the same.
Now tell me this, James Noble Allan had been a local politician for many years, but in '51 he decides to run provincially at the age of 57.
57.
First time MPP candidate at 57. Why did he wait so long?
Well, I don't think it was a matter of waiting so long. As you say, Jim was a long-time local municipal politician. From 1915 to 1951, he was a councillor in the township of Camborough, then Reeve, which is equivalent to mayor, then councillor in Dunnville, Reeve in Dunnville, and then he was a warden, which is the same as mayor of Haldimand County. Jim's big thing was roads. Like, as you probably mentioned in my book, I referenced when I had a pile of papers from my mother's estate, there was a tax bill from 1917. for $7.50. And it said, don't forget to grade the road in front of your property. Up until 1951 in Haldimand County, as in a lot of rural counties, you had to grade the property, you had to grade the road in front of your property every year, or at least twice a year, as part of your taxes. But after 51, they started getting their own machinery and whatnot, and that was dropped after 1951. But basically, Jim was very well known to Queen's Park and to Old Man Ontario, Leslie Frost. And Charlie Martin, the outgoing MPP for Haldimand Norfolk, wasn't running, and Frost asked Jim to run. And Jim was extremely popular in Haldimand and well-known and popular in Norfolk, and he won the election that year over Elmo Riddle very handily. Well, actually, if I remember correctly, in 1951, the Liberals did so badly is that the precursor to the NDP, the CCF, were the official opposition that year.
Yeah. James Allan, as you suggest, he loved roads and highways, and he became the Minister of Highways. What did they build in those years that he was the Minister of Highways?
Well, it wasn't so much they built it when he was, the short time he was Minister of Highways. You have to remember, if you wanted to go from out in the boonies where I live, you know, Dunnville or Jarvis, you had to take a train to Caledonia. If you wanted to go to Toronto, take a train to Caledonia, change trains to Hamilton, change trains to Toronto. Either that or you drove and you went around the side roads up into Highway 2, into Toronto, or you took the QEW and crossed at the lift bridge. You're probably old enough, Steve. Your parents might have told you of the lineups that used to be on either side of the lift bridge when a boat was approaching.
I remember.
Mother told me the lineups could be 3, 4, even 5 miles long. And then, and Jim had been pushing for some sort of high-level access for many, many years. But it wasn't until 1953 when the sister ship of the Edmund Fitzgerald, the W.E. Fitzgerald, the bridge jammed, and the W.E. Fitzgerald ran into the lift bridge, severely damaging it. And the lift, it was stuck in the lift position for about 3 months. And if you go back a couple of years ago, when that dump truck with the raised box hit the Skyway, the problems it caused. Can you imagine 3 months like that without having access across the Burlington Ship Canal? And that finally galvanized the provincial government, and they commissioned plans and such to build the Skyway. And Jim came in as Minister of Highways in 1955, and he was able to shepherd the final construction through and whatnot.
In December of '58, Premier Frost shuffled his cabinet and gave Jim Allan the biggest job in cabinet. He became the minister, what we today call the Minister of Finance. Back then, the Minister of Economics or Treasurer. What was the most important new policy that he implemented?
Well, in 1960, Leslie Frost floated the idea of the first provincial sales tax, 3%. And as we all know, a tax like that is always very unpopular, and Jim was given the responsibility of selling it. Now, as I mentioned in my book, and this is what Bill Davis had told me, they're going into the 1959 election, and Bill was replacing Tom Kennedy, who had passed away. And what happened 3 months before the election? Black Friday, when the Arrow was canceled. And so all of a sudden, you've got almost 15,000 people thrown out of work in the Malton, Mississauga, Peel area. And while the Tories didn't lose their majority, they lost about 14 seats. And, you know,
But Bill Davis won his.
Bill Davis won his handily. Well,
barely, not handily, barely.
Well, Bill always won, it seems.
But they brought in the sales tax.
Well, they brought in the sales
Allan.
tax, and
You remember what they nicknamed it?
frostbite.
Exactly.
And Jim did such a good job of selling that tax. In the next election in 1963, they increased their seat count by 17 seats, I think it was.
Now let's talk about that, because after Frost left, of course, they had a leadership convention to replace him. It ended up being won by John Robarts. This is in November of 1961. And Jim Allan thought about running for that leadership, didn't, then changed his mind and did.
He thought too long.
That's what happened.
Well, this is, when I interviewed Premier Davis, we talked about that, and he had said that Jim was considered by and large the front runner. and people were encouraging him to run, but for whatever reason, Jim hesitated, vacillated, however you want to describe it. And by the time he got in, delegates and MPPs and such had already made their commitments. And as you know, changing horses and something like that, just because somebody else comes in, it's political suicide. You can't do it.
He was older than Leslie Frost, though. So the notion that they would replace Frost with a guy who was older than him wasn't necessarily generational change.
It was only 6 months, though. 6 months.
Okay, but that's not generational change.
No.
Which had been the party's kind of secret to staying in power. So you think he would have been the right choice?
I think he would have been the right choice.
Ahead of Robarts?
Don't get me wrong, Robarts did a good job, but, and this is all pure speculation. I mean, this is what, 56 years ago, we can only surmise, but Jim was a very forward-thinking man. He always seemed to be, 2, 3, even 4, 5 steps ahead of the curve. I mean, the man was as smart as a whip. I mean, again, you don't jump from grade 8 in a one-room schoolhouse to university in a major city such as Guelph unless you've got something on the ball.
Now, tell me this. He stayed as an MPP into his 80s.
Yeah.
And then in 1975, having won, 6 elections in a row, he lost.
Well, you think on it, he'd won every election since 1915.
If you include the municipal ones.
That's a streak, and you'll never see a streak like that matched.
Okay, but how did he end up losing in 75?
Well, it was a combination of 2 factors. In 1971, the Davis government announced regional government. Now, backtrack into the a few years previous, into the mid-60s, where I live now, it used to be called Walpole Township. And you're familiar with the Nanticoke Industrial Park, the refinery, Stelco, the hydro plant is now decommissioned. Walpole Township was developing that 9,600 acres and the province didn't think that a backwater agrarian township had the municipal and administrative wherewithal to undertake such a project. And they said, and this was one of the reasons they brought in regional government. So when they brought it in for like Ottawa, Sudbury, Hamilton, St. Catharines, Fort Erie, et cetera, they included Haldimand, Norfolk. And in the stroke of a pen, hundreds of, 150 years of history disappeared.
So he probably carried the can for some of that.
And also about the same time, John White, who was Davis's treasurer at the time, announced the satellite cities of Townsend and South Cayuga. Townsend, which is 2.5 miles from my house, by 1990, they were supposed to have 100,000 people living there.
Yeah, it never happened.
Well, they've never cracked 1,000.
Yeah.
And and South Cayuga, because of the problem, the lack of sales in Townsend and the general angst towards it, South Cayuga was never developed. And then later on, it went on to the possible toxic waste dump. But backing up to the 1975 election, people were very upset at the Davis government in Haldimand, Norfolk. I turned 18 in May of '75, and that was the first election I could vote, and I was very involved in it. And you could feel it, you could sense it. And up until that time, Jim was invincible. Like, only the Grim Reaper would have defeated him.
And interestingly enough, the guy who defeated him, Gord Miller, is still alive and is, 90?
Gord will be 94 next February.
94, how about that?
I see Gord on a regular basis. I'm doing his memoirs and family history right now. And he's, like me, he's just an old farmer, and we chug along.
Okay, let's get to the anniversary that we're celebrating today, because in 1984, on Jim Allan's 90th birthday, the Bill Davis government named this bridge after him. It's now called the Burlington Bay James N. Allan Skyway Bridge. So next time you people drive across that bridge, you remember it's named after this guy. In 1988, Fanshawe College named one of its campuses after James Allan, the Simcoe campus.
Simcoe, yes.
And he died in 1992. Ultimately, what do you think is his legacy to Ontario?
Well, the Skyway is his legacy, but again, as you say, people cross it, they see the nameplate. Who's James N. Allan? That's a trivia question on radio stations. Who's the Skyway named after? But his legacy is the Skyway. His legacy is the infrastructure in Haldimand that was created, during his time in municipal and provincial politics. And there's still many people out in the east end of Haldimand in Dunnville that remember him very fondly. My cousin Fred, his Uncle Bill Stiers on his mother's side, worked for Jim for many, many years in the dairy. And he would always be bringing home free ice cream for the kids and whatnot. Jim was well known for friends, church members, fellow Lion members, Masonic brethren. He would pay their hospital and medical and pharmacy bills out of his own pocket, and he would never ask for it back. He wouldn't expect it back because that's what he did. When you say he passed away in 1992, I've talked to people at Amity Lodge in Dunnville, and that they said that the number of that's his Grand Lodge photo. Official Grand Lodge photo from 1965.
We should just show everybody what he looks like. There he is. There's Jim Allan right there.
And he would have been 71 in that picture. Can you imagine, at age 69, your day job is you're MPP of a large rural riding. You've got your office, committee and constituency work, and you're also the Treasurer of Ontario. You've got all that cabinet and committee work, weekly cabinet meetings. Yeah. And at nighttime, for 4 years, you're doing what we lovingly refer to as the Masonic rubber chicken circuit. You're going around to Grand Masters receptions, dedications, other lodge functions and whatnot, all over the province.
He was a busy guy.
He
was treasurer, I think, till he was 72 or something.
And Bill Davis said he stepped down in '66, and I remember when he stepped down to be minister of the portfolio. And Bill said they used to joke with Jimmy gone into semi-retirement.
I want to ask you one last question, and that is, have you ever heard the Johnny Cash song, A Boy Named Sue?
Oh, I remember it on the radio quite well back in the '60s.
You know why I'm asking you this?
No.
Because you're a man named Allison. Can you explain that to me?
My mother was in the old Beckcliff Hospital in Hagersville after I was born, and my father and my oldest brother, Alec, were in there, and my mother says, well, what are we going to name him? And my brother Alec says, well, why don't we name him Allison? His Sunday school teacher, who was a lodge brother of mine, Allison Murphy, Alec suggested Allison. My father says, Allison it is, and my mother says, I don't give a goddamn what you call him, I'm calling him Sam. So I've been nicknamed Sam ever since I could walk under a rat's behind with a high silk hat on.
Okay, that's the story. Sam Allison, or Allison.
Just call me Sam.
Sam Gowling. It's nice of you to make the drive in from Haldimand County.
Oh, it was a pleasure.
And for people who want to know more about the guy they named the Skyway Bridge after, James Noble Allan, the man, the mason, the MPP.
And it's still available on eBay and whatnot. And I'm working on my second book, A History of the Bicycle.
Okay, good
Tom
enough.
with Schwinn.
Good enough. Sam, thanks a lot. Good to meet you.
Thank you.